Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 804B, and today's date is October 29th, 2015, and the title of this episode is U.S. Needs Ground Troops in Syria to Push the Agenda of Removing Assad. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, we see the private Western central bank countries trying to push the agenda of global warming. Now, I'm one of those people that does not believe that the people are warming the climate. I believe it's from the sun. I believe they're using global warming to push a carbon tax on the people. And we got the message from Christine Lagarde from the IMF saying this would be a perfect time to push the carbon tax because it would help pay down the debt. Very interesting. And when you look back in time, and you look at the real raw data, you see that global warming is a complete fraud. And it's fake, phony, and false. And what's very interesting, if you go back in time, they've said so many different things. For example, and I'll read a couple of them because I read this in another report, but just to remind everyone, in 1970, they said we will be in an ice age by 2000. In 1976, global cooling will cause a world war by 2000. 1989, global warming and rising sea levels will wipe entire nations off the map by 2000. Are any of them gone yet? No, they're not. 1990, we have 5 to 10 years to save the rainforest. They're still there. 1999, the Himalayan glaciers will be gone in 10 years. They're still there. 2000, snow will soon be a thing of the past. 2007, global warming will cause fewer hurricanes. Well, I'm seeing an increase of hurricanes. And you have to remember, back in the 70s, we were in a Maunder minimum where everything was getting colder. Then as we moved into the late 80s, 90s, we came out of that and the climate was warming up, and now we're back into the Maunder minimum, which is controlled by the sun output, and this is why we're seeing cooler, colder weather. 2008, the Arctic will be ice-free by 2013. Well, it's 2015 right now, and what do you see? More ice on the Arctic. 2012, global warming will cause more hurricanes. Well, they just switched it up right now because they were completely wrong. 2014, don't ask any more questions. The science is settled. We are not going to talk about this anymore. And whenever you deal in science, you can use the raw data, the information, to continually repeat whatever results they're getting. So if they're having a problem with it, that means they're lying. When you can't take their raw data and continually repeat what they're saying, and they're saying the science is settled, you know this is a scam and lie. Now, President Putin is out there, and he mentioned something about global warming. And Putin says he believes there is no global warming, that this is a fraud to restrain the industrial development of several countries, including Russia. Well, this is one part of the agenda. Putin has been casting doubt on man-made global warming since 2000. And most of the other countries now are looking at this and saying, you know something? This isn't real. We've been scammed by all of this. I mean, I remember at one point when they said the polar bears are going to drown in the Arctic because all the ice is disappearing and they won't have any place to go. Well, polar bears can't drown because they're fat and their hair is hollow, which allows them to float. Basically, the government, just like they lie about everything else, the central bankers that lie about everything else, is lying right now. They are telling you you are responsible for all the wrongs of the world, and you need to pay. That's really what they're doing. And you know what they're doing because the debt is so high. And they knew when we came off of the gold standard back in 1970, this is when this started, they knew they would have 40 years. So they projected this out and said, okay, we need to convince the people that they are a problem. And this is what they've done all of these years. And they just change their stories to go along with that, whatever the weather is doing at the time. Now, we understand that there's a huge refugee problem across Europe. It's all caused by the United States. But in Austria, what we're seeing is that they're getting nervous. And we're seeing that handguns and rifle sales are spiking in Austria. Some of the shops reporting they are running out of stocks of shotguns since no license is needed to buy them. And the people are saying, you know something, we're a little nervous with thousands upon thousands of these people coming in to our country. A lot of the countries are closing their borders. A lot of them are talking about setting up walls. And it seems like the people are saying, you know something, we need a way to protect ourselves because we don't know who these people are. And we can see that they're getting very nervous. Here in this country, as the illegal immigrants come over the border, they do absolutely no check whatsoever, no background check. We don't know if they're criminals or not. We don't know if they committed murder, rape, or anything else. They're just letting them into the country and sending them to different towns. The same thing with the refugees that are going to be coming in. There is no check and balance in this. They're just bringing them in. And we know this whole problem was caused by the United States. Now, out in Kiev, Kiev is saying, we are ready to open our skies with Russia. And we have to understand that Kiev closed their skies to Russian airplanes. They didn't want Russian airplanes flying over their country. And they want Russia to pay the pending fines. And they want flights coming into Crimea to be non-existent. So they don't want Russia to fly planes into Crimea. And they want them to pay a pending fine. And then they will allow Russian planes to fly across Ukraine. And of course, Russia's sitting here going, this is absolutely ridiculous. We are not doing this. Now, we know the ceasefire, the Minsk II agreement, is still in effect. We're still seeing shelling from the Kiev government. And we know that expires at the end of this year. And we know the United States and other nations are in there training their National Guard, their armed forces. And right now, a U.S. Army delegation led by Chief of Staff General Mark Milley has arrived in Ukraine on an official visit. The sides are discussing issues related to security and identified further directions and effective forms of military cooperation. They're also discussing the types of possible assistance which would be provided by the United States, taking into account the situation in eastern Ukraine gets worse. So we have the armed forces in Ukraine talking to the military in Kiev about what will happen if the situation gets worse. It seems like they're planning on something. And most likely, to get the war started in Ukraine, it will be a false flag event. To blame it on the southeastern people so they can say, okay, we had enough of this, we're going after the terrorists, because that's what they call them. Now, we understand the United States government, central bankers, they decided to sail a ship around the islands where China created. It's the Spratly Islands. And right now, China's holding back. They're saying a few words, but they're saying, you know something, let's stay calm here. And right now, we see a U.S. Pacific commander is going to visit China. And they're going to discuss what happened and what they can do about this. And this is supposed to take place between November 2nd and the 5th. Now, does this mean that this is all said and done? No. We've seen the United States go into certain situations and discuss things, and nothing comes of it. But they do it to show the world that, yes, we're looking for a peaceful situation. And as soon as they leave, because as you know, when they discuss something, it's not both sides coming to an agreement. It's the United States saying, you will do what we say, and if you don't, you'll feel the consequence of what you're doing. And we've seen this time and time again. I mean, with Assad, we saw when they went to the Geneva II talks, they had one agenda. Assad, you must step down. Well, let's come to some other terms. No. We have one term. Assad, step down. In Kiev, Poroshenko says, surrender, throw down your arms, give up. That's the peace. That's all they know. They're one-sided. It's their way or the highway. That's how they do it. Now, there are reports coming out that NATO is looking to station thousands of troops on the border with Russia. And we understand that NATO is creating these rapid reaction force to go after Russia. We understand they're having huge drills to simulate World War III. And we know NATO and the U.S. has been moving military assets all over Europe, bringing them closer and closer to Russia. It's almost like Russia bringing their troops on the border of the United States through Canada and Mexico. How would the United States react? They wouldn't react well. They would think, what's going on here? Why do we see this? And this is how Russia feels right now. And there's reports saying that NATO countries are discussing increasing the number of troops stationed in member states bordering Russia, and they're looking to bring in between 1,000 and 4,000 troops. Now, NATO is saying, no, this is completely false, fake, and phony. We are not planning anything. Well, I'm going to go with the opposite of that. It looks like it was leaked out, and they're trying to cover up what they're actually doing. And they're continually provoking and pushing Russia, and most likely in the next couple weeks, we will see troops heading into these areas. Now, it looks like there was some type of mishap or some type of incident near the USS Ronald Reagan in the Pacific Ocean. Looks like there was a Russian Tu-142 Bear plane flying near the USS Ronald Reagan, and the U.S. set up 2 jet fighters to intercept. And nothing really happened. And again, the bomber was in international airspace, flying in that area. And this is very common for military to send up their jets to check it out, to see what's up there. And of course, the U.S. corporate media is making this a really, really big deal because they have to keep the idea that Russia is provoking. And we've seen a lot of these things where they said, ooh, a Russian bomber is flying, near England. But of course, it was in international airspace. We had other countries saying that Russia has a sub there, and it turned out it wasn't a Russian sub. But of course, the corporate media blew it all out of proportion. And whenever we find out that it wasn't, it's always like in little tiny writing on the back page or somewhere hidden on their site, so you can't find that information out, because they want the original story to be in your head to make you believe that Russia is the aggressor. Now, the Islamic State is setting its sights on Libya's oil infrastructure. Now, we know Russia has been pushing the Islamic State out of Syria. A lot of these forces, which are the proxy forces, proxy army for the United States government central bankers, have been airlifted out of Syria via Turkey and Qatar and brought into Yemen. And some of them now are being brought into Libya. And in Libya, what they're doing is they're fighting against the people who've taken control of the oil infrastructure. Remember, the whole thing has to do with the central bank, with the natural resources, selling the natural resources on the dollar. And this is why in Libya, the puppet government moved the central bank out of Tripoli, because they wanted other countries to do business with them. But guess what? They're not. They're doing business with the government that's in Tripoli because their constitution says if the government is located in Tripoli and elected by the people, that is the government. So now they're sending in the Islamic State to capture the oil infrastructure so they can stop the sale of oil in there. Because you have to remember, most of these sales are being made not using the dollar. They're using other currencies. And the central bankers cannot have this. Now, the U.S. admitted that Russia has not attacked the U.S.-trained terrorist assets. Now, of course, in the corporate media and all our government employees are out there saying that Russia is hitting the moderates. They're hitting all the forces that we trained. This is outrageous. They're hitting hospitals. And it turns out, again, it's all completely propaganda propaganda. Yesterday at the United States Senate Committee on Armed Services, John McCain grilled Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter during questioning. Carter admitted that neither Russia nor the Syrian army has targeted the U.S.-trained terrorists. They didn't do it. But of course, that wasn't broadcasted all over the corporate media. Now, Europe, they are looking and they're considering to bring combat operations to Iraq and Syria, to bring ground troops into this area. Very interesting. We had all the refugees flowing up through Europe, blaming it on Syria, blaming it on Assad, and now we have the European nations saying, you know something, we might go into Syria to just cut this whole thing out, to stop it. I think this was part of their plan here, to get the European nations included in removing Assad. Now, the U.S.-led coalition has conducted no airstrikes in Syria for the second day in a row. Meanwhile, the Russian air group deployed 71 combat missions in the last 24 hours, hitting 118 terrorist targets. Remember, Russia set up a no-fly zone in Syria. They have a jamming device which jams the coalition planes. They have the missile system, the S-400/500 missile system, and they created some type of bubble. They also have satellites above so they can see what targets the coalition forces are hitting. This is a problem because we know they have not been hitting the Islamic State. They've been hitting the infrastructure of Syria and the people of Syria. Now, Kerry says they're going to continually resupply the moderates, which are the terrorists. Let's just come out and say it. They're the Islamic State or whatever other terrorist group or whatever they rebranded them to. And they're going to continually give them weapons. Now, the Pentagon finally admitted that, yes, we are in combat in Iraq. All those advisors that we sent, they are fighting. Well, we knew this. This is called mission creep. We saw this back in Vietnam, where they send in the advisors. They said, no, they're there to advise. They're not going to be in any combat. And of course, you learn that, yes, they are in combat. They're fighting. And eventually what's going to happen is more and more troops are going to move into Iraq and Syria. And this is where we are today. We actually see more troops going into these countries. They're already throwing it out there. They already have plans to bring a ground invasion in Iraq and Syria. Colonel Stephen Warren, a U.S. military spokesman in Baghdad, described the mission in blunt terms. We're in combat, he said, speaking via video feed to reporters at the Pentagon. That's why we all carry guns. That's why we all get combat patches when we leave here. And that's why we all receive imminent danger pay. So, of course, we're in combat. So, once again, the president lied. Because remember what he said? We will not be sending U.S. troops back into combat in Iraq. June 13th, 2014. As I've said before, these American forces in Iraq will not have a combat mission. September 10th, 2014, President Obama. Well, he lied once again. Now, Russia appears to be ramping up its campaign to obliterate the Islamic State in Syria, and they are continually heading south now. So they're driving the Islamic State further east, and now they're moving south in Syria. And Moscow is now reporting that the Islamic State terrorists, they do have chemical weapons. They do have chlorine, they do have sarin gas, they have mustard gas, and Moscow is saying they have proof now. And we need an investigation on who actually used the gas on the people of Syria. And guess what they're going to find out? It wasn't Assad. It was the terrorists. Why would Assad use chemical weapons on his own people when 86 to 87% voted for him in the election? When the majority of the people are behind him. This would be like George Washington, who was fighting in the Revolution to kill his own people. It wouldn't make sense. This is how you know it's propaganda. And we always knew the Free Syrian Army, Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, they were the ones always using the gas. Actually, MIT did an experiment back in Syria in 2013 where they said the missile trajectory came from the Free Syrian Army. Then they found the cave with all the sarin gas, and it was the Free Syrian Army. So that red line is absolutely ridiculous that Obama was talking about. It was, again, propaganda to get us into Syria. Now, the U.S. is trying to push a UN resolution on barrel bombs, another propaganda tactic, and Russia is saying they're going to oppose the draft that they're providing to the United Nations. And this resolution is an attempt to blame all of this on Assad. All the killings of Syrian people, they want to blame Assad. And this resolution would do this. It would take all the blame and push it towards him. And Russia realizes this, and they realize it's really the terrorist groups that have been attacking the people in Syria, and they're objecting to this. But the United States always uses dirty tricks to convince the world. They always use propaganda, and you know what they never have? Proof. They never show proof. And when they do, it's the worst proof you've ever seen. Almost like these satellite images in Ukraine when they said Russian troops were being built up in Ukraine and they had thousands of tanks, hundreds of thousands of troops, and they gave us black and white fuzzy satellite photos. And then they showed troops of Russian tanks, and that was a photo taken back in 2009. So they're not very good at this, and because of the internet, it causes a lot of problems for them. Now, we're getting reports that the U.S. healthcare was under a tidal wave of Chinese hacking. U.S. officials have determined that the Chinese hackers breached the health insurance company Anthem in order to gain insight into the American medical system. I don't know, I kind of laughed when I heard this, because right now the U.S. ranks 37th in the world for healthcare. Why in the world would the Chinese people, the government, the hackers, want our healthcare system? Why wouldn't they go to the countries that are above us? We're number 37. Does that make any sense? This is how you know it's propaganda once again. And of course, it is very difficult to find out who hacked. I know they're coming out an hour, 2 hours later with all the information. And if it was this easy, all the spam email, all the cyber crimes, they all be solved. But it seems like they only solve the ones that have to do with China and Russia and North Korea. It's amazing. Now we see the MI5 out there. The chief is warning ISIS is planning a mass attack. Now we know the Islamic State is the proxy army for the United States government, UK, and the other coalition forces. So why would the Islamic State do this? Well, they wouldn't. This is part of their agenda. MI5 Director General Andrew Parker warns that terror threat in Britain is at its highest level ever, because they're planning attack on the UK soil. We hear this in the United States. We hear this in other European nations. Well, there's many different agendas with this. And the first agenda is they're trying to pass the government's controversial investigatory powers bill, also known as the Snoopers Charter. And it's due to be debated in the House of Commons. So what do? They ramp up the notion that the Islamic State is coming to get them. This way they can say, if we have this bill passed, we can stop them. And of course they're saying, we are seeing plots against the UK directed by terrorists in Syria, enabled through contacts with terrorists in Syria, and inspired online by ISIL's sophisticated exploitation of technology. Its uses It uses the full range of modern communication tools to spread its message of hate, and we need this bill passed. Plus, the other agenda is to get everyone convinced that the Islamic State, the terrorist organization, will be conducting a physical attack on the UK, European nations, and the United States. And this will allow them to say, we need to go full force into Syria in the United States. We need to pass the authorization for war, and we need to kick war off. This is what they're doing. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.